Hi everybody, Professor H here. Tonight we're going to go ahead and go over our video, our PowerPoint for late adulthood. So let's go ahead and get started. So before we get rolling on this PowerPoint, I just want to give you a little bit of food for thought. Here's some things to think about while we're going through the video. What is optimal aging? What can society do to encourage optimal aging in late adulthood? What can you do to encourage optimal aging in your older family members? What specific things can you do right now, today, to increase the likelihood that you will experience optimal aging in late adulthood? So I put this up here because all through our class, I've been talking about the importance of proper diet, proper exercise, stress reduction, good sleep, and these are all things that you can do to optimize the way you age. By starting and creating good habits when you're an emerging adult or young adult, this research has shown that it will help you to have more successful aging in late adulthood, and we'll talk more about that later. So this is just our intro screen. We have some older people demonstrated on this slide. A late adulthood is going from about the 60s or 70s all the way through death. So that's what we will be considering late adulthood. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take my video off so you don't have to stare at me the whole time, and we'll go from here. All right, how old is old? For late adulthood, we have three substages. We have the first one, which is called young old, from around 60 to 74. We have old, which is approximately 74 to 84, and what we call oldest old, which is ages 85 and up. So our late adulthood is divided into these three categories. Each substage is different regarding physical, cognitive, and social functioning. So we're going to go over some of the changes that we see in the three areas that we've been covering throughout the semester, which are physical, cognitive, and social functioning. And for each of these topics that we go over, we'll see these changes of late adulthood beginning in the younger side of the older adults, and then progressing forward. People in these three categories also differ in the way that they perform acts of daily living. Acts of daily living are things like being able to get up off the couch and go walk to the restroom, even with a walker or without a walker. Are you able to cook dinner for yourself? Are you able to do your laundry? Can you bend down and put your shoes on? These are all acts of daily living. When people enter late adulthood, they are often quite independent. And there is a large variation of where people are on their acts of daily living when they go through late adulthood. A functional age may be a better concept to use than the chronological age. For example, when we look at people who make it to 100 years old, most of those people are fairly independent. They have pretty good cognitive functioning, and they don't have a lot of health issues. That is something that we see when we are looking at people that make it to 100 years old. Now, somebody at 70 years old may be having a lot more difficulty with their acts of daily living, may have poor reported health, and a lot of difficulty with ambulation, which is walking or moving around, when compared to the 100-year-old. So that's what I mean by functional age, maybe a better concept to use than chronological age. Chronological age is how many years old you are. There are different cultural ideas about old age. For example, in Asian, African, and Latin cultures, they tend to have a more favorable view on old age. People who reach old age in late adulthood in these cultures have a tendency to be respected, and their wisdom is valued. they are valued as members of the society and values as members of the culture. However, in Western cultures, this view of the elderly is not consistent. Basically, Western cultures have a tendency and a historical tendency to think of people in late adulthood or later in life to be less valued. This leads to ageism, which is that type of discrimination against older people. Even though these views are changing, we still face ageism in Western cultures. And in the Western cultures, those who are in late adulthood, in old age, are the poorest group in society until 50 years ago. People now, there's a generation of older people that were able to work good jobs, have good retirement, and be able to build some wealth. So that particular group has a tendency to not be as poor as the groups that came before them. There are different global patterns in old age dependency. So there's something called the Old Age Dependency Ratio. That ratio is the number of persons age 65 or older divided by the number of persons age 20 to 64. In other words, it's the number of people that are retirement age, possibly not working, divided by the number of people that are still working and contributing financially to safety net systems that are in place for older people, like Medicare. So the top number represents those not in the workforce, but who do receive government benefits in a lot of countries. And the second number represents the workforce who pay into the government. So this we see in a lot of developed countries. The old age dependency ratio increase means more people receiving benefits and not enough paying in to cover. One of the big problems that developed countries are having are aging populations. There are a lot of Western countries who are becoming kind of upside down on this ratio, meaning that as their population gets older and leaves the workforce, the number of people retired kind of is going to outnumber those who are working and able to pay into Social Security and things like that. Japan is faced with an exceptional challenge because they have a aging population, and they have not, people in Japan are not having 5 kids or 4 kids, usually just a couple of kids. So that ratio is more pronounced. In addition, Japan has not allowed a lot of immigration. The United States is one of the few developed countries that has been able to not have a big crisis due to the old age dependency ratio. The reason that the United States is not following the same pattern as Japan and some of the other European countries that are going into a crisis period because of their aging workforce and not enough young people to pay in and take care of everybody is because of the United States immigration policies. Immigration policies in the United States have allowed younger people to come in and work and pay into that Social Security and keep that safety net afloat. And that's a difference between the United States and a country like Japan. Recently, Japan is now starting to open up to a certain amount of immigration because of the challenges from rising old age dependency ratio. Some reasons for this climbing old age dependency ratio are low fertility rates, increase in life expectancy, Medicare increases longevity. So in other words, because we have medical care that is advanced in developed countries, this advanced medical care can take care of a lot of these ailments that would kill people who are in a developing country who do not have the resources to get that type of medical care. So people in developed countries live longer. There are also some gender differences in life expectancy. Basically, women have a tendency to outlive men. This graph shows rates of impairment in activities of daily living, which is the ADLs. And this is showing selected developed and developing countries. Interestingly, when I was looking at this graph to prepare for this lecture, I noticed that the United States is not on here. So I would be interested to find out where the United States falls on this. I will probably take a look and see if I can find that out for us. My guess, kind of off the cuff, would be that we would be somewhere in the lower end, because lower end meaning that we would have a higher percentage of people with impairment in late adulthood based on eating patterns and exercise patterns for adults in the United States, because we do not eat healthy in general, and we have a tendency to be obese, not exercise enough, which can lead to a lot of other health issues. Some physical changes that we see in late adulthood are similar to what we started seeing in middle adulthood. However, we see kind of more pronounced changes. There are two main types of aging that we're going to talk about. The first one would be just the biological changes. Biological changes kind of have to do with like your cellular level, things that are changing within the body that are natural and that are common to all humans. There's a certain amount of aging and degeneration that's going to occur within the body on a biological level, regardless of lifestyle. Secondary aging, however, is resulting from lifestyle. So these are declines in physical health and functioning due to lifestyle. Our brain undergoes a certain amount of change during late adulthood. It is shrinking from 5 to 10% of brain volume over the course of adulthood. And if you remember, in young adulthood is when we first started that aging process. This results in a decrease in dendrites. Remember that dendrites are the little antennae in there that are picking up messages from other neurons. There's a loss of myelination. That myelination is that fatty type of cell that wraps that axon and helps speed up transmission between neurons. There is neuronal loss. There's certain areas that are going to be losing certain neurons, and a decrease in general in the prefrontal cortex. Excuse me. Other neurological changes that you might see are slowing of function in the central nervous system. Your reaction time is going to get a little bit slower, and reduced neurotransmitter production. So these are just kind of some general issues that we see. This does not mean that the older adult is going to completely lose functioning. There's some things that we can do to maximize the aging, to age better. The brain only loses a portion of function, and in some cases maintains or even gains some function. So basically, a person can have a lot of dendritic growth. In other words, those connections, those synapses can be growing because you're having more dendritic growth. Remember, those are the little antennae. Those dendrites are going to be picking up signals from the other neuron across the synapse. And from 40 to 70, you may compensate for some neuron loss. Older adults are more likely to use both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously. So with our aging brain, we may have this type of shrinkage and loss going on. However, if we keep ourselves cognitively active, read a murder mystery, do crossword puzzles, do some Sudoku, do a puzzle, do things to keep yourself cognitively active. This helps with that dendritic growth, which gives us a little extra to work with later on. When I talk about older adults using both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously, we've mentioned earlier in our lectures that we have specializations within our brain, where one hemisphere maybe processes language more than the other hemisphere. However, when we measure problem solving and language use in older adults, for example, in an MRI, what we see is that younger people have more lateralization. In other words, one part of the brain is usually you can see that area lighting up on the MRI a lot more than with the older person. The older person, you'll see a lot of different areas on both hemispheres of the brain lighting up in that MRI, that fMRI, doing the same task. So in other words, as we age, we seem to use our brains a little bit differently. Other physical changes that are continued from middle adulthood. Our hair will continue to gray and thin. Men and female both have this occur. Bones will become thinner, especially in women. We talked about osteoporosis. Age spots develop. What a drag, I've already got some of those. Height, and that a lot of that has to do with sun exposure. So if you've had a lot of sun exposure, you have a tendency to have more age spots, which once again is that hyperpigmentation. Height and weight often decline. That is due to the osteoporosis or the discs in your back compressing over time. Your spine is upright in that column, and in between each of those vertebrae are some discs and some spongy material. Over time, those tissues can kind of break down, so you'll lose some height during this time, and you don't usually keep putting on the pounds in later adulthood. Teeth tend to yellow because the enamel tends to wear out on your teeth. When you make it to 100 years old, you may still have all your teeth if you've taken good care of them and had good nutrition, but your enamel will probably start to fail. So you might have to have a special toothpaste or things like that to protect your teeth, and they will begin to yellow regardless of how well you've cared for them. Exercise and healthy diet can slow some changes. Older adults, people in late adulthood, often walk or do yoga or do gentle exercise to maintain their health. Other physical changes are changes to the immune system. The immune system no longer works quite as well as it did in middle adulthood, and we do know that in middle adulthood, from our previous lecture, we are already losing some of that ability. Physical appearance, shorter, smaller, grayer, more wrinkles. Motor development slows for practically all movements at all difficulty levels. So in other words, just getting up off the couch, you're going to do it a little more slowly and a little more carefully than you did in middle adulthood. As you get older and you go through these stages of late adulthood, you will decrease in your speed of doing these tasks. Arthritis is something that tends to really bother people over the age of 65 in developed countries. About half of adults over the age of 65 have arthritis in developed countries. The cartilage that cushions the joints often wear out, causing a lot of joint pain, and women have a tendency to be affected more than men, and this could have to do with some of the hormonal changes that women go through. Other chronic problems, osteoporosis, we talked about this in our last video, increased risk for broken bones. Remember, this is a age-related change in bones where you have bone loss. Exercise and calcium-rich diet help to treat this condition, as I mentioned in our last lecture. Gentle weight training to build that muscle and that strength in the bones can help, and just making sure you eat a good diet, especially rich in calcium. Hypertension is high blood pressure that affects 70% of US adults over age of 55. Secondary aging makes the condition worse. In other words, if you're overweight and sedentary, you're not going out and exercising, you're going to have more problems with hypertension. So your lifestyle leading up to late adulthood is going to have an impact on how much you're dealing with hypertension in late adulthood. Diet and medications are also treatment options for hypertension. Our sensory development in late adulthood, once again, our visual acuity decreases. just like we talked about before, dark adaptation is slower, so your pupil is not going to contract and expand like it did when you were younger. The visual field shrinks. Oftentimes, people lose part of the areas of their peripheral vision, or depending on, and the peripheral vision is that area out to the side. Like if you hold your hands out to your side, that's your peripheral vision. How you can look forward and see your hands off to the side while keeping your head straight, that's your peripheral vision. That field shrinks. Color vision declines. That is partly because you lose photosensitive cells in the retina as you age. Depth perception increases because of this as well. Once again, we talked last lecture when we talked about middle adulthood about the lens not being able to change shape as readily for focus, and that it starts to discolor. After the age of 75, glare becomes a big difficulty. So if you are, say you're driving and you have the glare from a headlight in your windshield, a young adult would recover after about 10 seconds. Now, 10 seconds when you're driving is a very long time because you can cover a lot of ground in 10 seconds. So that glare you will recover from quickly as a young adult. About 50% of 90-year-olds haven't recovered after about 1.5 minutes. So if you can imagine a 90-year-old driving at night and the headlights hitting them, they may be kind of blinded for 1.5 minutes, which is very dangerous. Some issues that we see in old age with vision. The first one, first disease of the eye we're going to talk about is cataracts. Cataracts exists of a thickening of the lens. It causes a cloudy, opaque, distorted vision. And what you can see in this image, the eye of the older woman that has a cataract in it has that gray covering. So that gray, excuse me, that gray lens has that cloudiness on it. It affects 30% of adults 70 and plus. There may be a genetic component to this. I'm getting checked for this all the time because my great-grandmother had, had some glaucoma and cataracts. Cataracts can also be caused by surgeries. People with diabetes often have a lot of procedures done on their eyes, or people with LASIK surgery can sometimes end up with some cataracts when they're older. And then cataracts can be removed off of the eye successfully most of the time. Okay, so this is a picture. This is what somebody with a cataract would see. So on one side, you see a clear image of the boys, and on the other side, you see a very blurred vision. This is what somebody with cataracts would see. If they have cataracts on their eye, that's the type of vision they would see. Glaucoma is the other disease of the eye that I had mentioned. It is damage to the optic nerve. So it's actually like with me, when I go to the eye doctor, they look in my eye and they're like, oh, your nerve in the back of your eye looks funky. And I get tested all the time for fluid buildup and pressure. And lucky for me, I haven't had anything come of it yet. But like I said, I do have it in my family. 1% of adults in their 70s have glaucoma. 10% of adults in their 90s. So as you can see, when you reach 90, you have more of these problems. This is what somebody with glaucoma would see. This bright, vivid child on one side, and then with glaucoma, you're seeing that the field of vision is diminished around the outside, and you'll see that the colors are muted. Macular degeneration is a deterioration of the focal center of the retina. It's a loss of vision in the center of the field of vision, which is called the macula there, or the macula is the part that's affected. It is the leading cause of blindness in old age. 1 in 25 adults ages 66 to 74 suffer from macular degeneration. 1 in 6 adults 75 years or older suffer from macular degeneration. People with diabetes have a much higher risk for macular degeneration. And some of the treatments that they do for this can cause cataracts, and then they have to have the cataracts taken off. It's just a bunch of treatment that people need to undergo for these conditions. So this is what these would see when they have macular degeneration. As you can see, these are the same two boys that we've been looking at, these same images. But what you're going to notice here is that in the center of the field of vision, there's kind of a gray spot. So in order for this person to kind of see who they're talking to, they have to use their peripheral vision. So they can kind of see somebody out of the corner of their eye, but they can't really see very well when they're looking straight on. This image is just structures of the eye, talks about some of the things that I mentioned. Here's the lens, which becomes more opaque or yellow and less flexible. The cornea can become, it's supposed to be transparent. It can become discolored. The retina is where the cells live that are your cones and your rods that give you that precise vision, and your optic nerve, which goes out the back. All right. Hearing, we've talked a little bit about this before. 75% of adults age 75 to 79 have hearing loss. 15% of adults over 65 are legally deaf. Hearing loss is due to damage in the cochlea. The cochlea is this spinny part here. Many adults may not recognize loss or may deny it. Oftentimes, people don't really realize that they're losing their hearing. And then they also just don't acknowledge that. Losing hearing can cause some big social problems for people because it's not very fun for somebody to go to a party or go to a family function or go meet with people down at the VA or wherever, or a sewing club, when you cannot hear what people are saying. Hearing aids have been created to help with this sort of problem. However, they don't solve all the problems with hearing. Sometimes hearing aids amplify a lot of the background noises and not just the target that you're trying to hear. Other sensory changes in late adulthood: smell and taste begin to fade at age 60, which can cause a reduced enjoyment for food and a decrease in life satisfaction for some people. You know, when you go out with the olds, I'm getting to be one of them, and they want to go to hometown buffet and put salt on everything, and the food is kind of bland. Well, they may not notice as much because their senses have already faded a little bit. Touch and pain sensitivity in like your fingertips and things like that have a tendency to lose sensitivity as well. So you lose sensitivity in your extremities and a decreased sensitivity to pain. I'm not saying that extreme pain won't hurt an older person, because it most certainly will. They have a lot of arthritis pains and things like that, but maybe touching a hot cup may not initially cause the same sensation of pain that it would for a younger person. A lot of damage can be done for people who have smoked and done heavy drinking for their whole life. There's a large range of negative health effects, including lung cancer. These rates are decreasing in developed countries as campaigns against smoking have taken place. Rates are rising in developing countries. We're not even going to really get into this, but cigarette companies, since they're not being quite as successful here, are going to a lot of different countries and like putting cigarettes in schools, basically in arcades and places like that, to kind of get people hooked on them when they're younger. Moderate alcohol consumption is okay for your health. It's just when you drink in excess, it can be a real problem. And of course, it depends on your medications that you're taking in late adulthood. Those types of things you have to really pay attention to. Because some medications are going to interact badly with alcohol. Sleep problems are common in late adulthood. The quality of sleep significantly declines after the age of 60, and you sleep less deeply. The time in light sleep tends to increase. With deep sleep, recent studies are showing that there is a connection to when you are in that deep sleep cycle, your brain is kind of cleaning stuff up a lot, taking away a lot of the waste. So if you don't get adequate sleep, you may not get some of that waste removed, which may lead to some other problems with your brain later on. Sleep apnea is a common sleep problem. It is especially bad for people who are overweight. It's a little bit more pronounced with people who are overweight, and sleep apnea is when you stop breathing for a period of time while you sleep, and it can be life-threatening. Psychological and medical issues can also impair sleep. People with depression have a tendency to wake up at about 2 in the morning and not go back to sleep. And then there's certain medical issues. When people are having certain health problems sometimes, or if they have to take steroids, they've been sick and they have to take prednisone or something like that, those types of medications can keep people from sleeping as well. Treating sleep issues. I know I kind of beat this to death over the course of the semester, but sleep is so important to your health. Regular sleeping and waking times are important. Have a bedtime, have a time to wake up. Older people in late adulthood have a tendency towards morningness. They have a tendency to get up really early in the morning and go to bed really early. So they have a tendency towards morningness. Avoiding alcohol or caffeine before bed helps a person to sleep better. Getting some regular exercise, avoiding daytime naps, and especially naps late in the day. And you may need to have to take some type of supplement for sleep issues. Now, taking a sleep pill is not necessarily the best approach. If you can try other things before that, it is recommended, because a medication that is designed for sleeping sometimes does not allow you to go through the proper sleep patterns. A lot of people take melatonin. The research is fuzzy on that as to whether or not it works. I feel it does, but that's anecdotal. The research is still out there on that. We don't know for sure if it works or not. So once again, to have successful aging, there are some things that you can do. And those things are to maintain your physical health by exercising and eating healthy, to maintain your cognitive functioning, continue to be cognitively active. Keep that brain working. Don't let your brain just stare at the TV and be lazy. Continued engagement with life. Once again, people who have vision or hearing difficulties sometimes have trouble becoming engaged with life and with other people. So it can be more of a challenge, but it is really important to remain engaged in activities and with other people and with having goals and things that you're doing with your life, even in late adulthood. There is a genetic component to successful aging. People that in their family have a tendency to have a lot of health problems, diabetes, all that kind of stuff. Some of those things can make it more difficult to have successful aging. However, it is not going to mean that you cannot have successful aging. Social and cultural framework also plays a major role in successful aging. How the society views the aging person makes a difference. Health effects of diet. Healthy diet is even more important in late adulthood. You need to have the right amount of a large variety of micronutrients. You have to have a diet low in fats and sugars. Heart disease is high in countries that eat lots of red meat. So Poland, Romania, and Russia, they have very high rates of heart disease. And some foods are even related to higher cancer risks. Oops, I have this one doubled. Oops, we'll just move past it. Okay. Once again, exercise is linked to longevity, which is living longer, prevention of chronic disease, reduced motor declines. In other words, it helps you stay mobile longer. It reduces mental health problems. We know that exercise increases dopamine and serotonin. It can increase your mood. It can reduce depression. It can reduce anxiety. It also improves cognitive function. And we've seen many studies throughout our course talking about how exercise has been linked to improved cognitive function. Where are we? The weekly recommendations is aerobic activity 5 days a week and strength training at least 2 days. And remember that strength training will help a person to combat osteoporosis. Automobile driving in late adulthood. Okay. In late adulthood, even if somebody is a fairly good driver, they are at higher risk to crash than even somebody that is 16 to 20 years old. So adults over age of 75 have a higher fatality rate in crashes than 16 to 20-year-olds. This is due to a lot of declining sensory abilities. People in the United States especially have a hard time giving up driving. It's a thing that's very, we are an individualistic society that values independence, and giving up driving to some people is perceived as giving up their independence. I'm sure that one day when it's time for me to give up driving, I'm going to have a hard time with it as well. Automobile crashes are a major threat to health in developed countries, but not so much in developing because a lot of people don't have cars. So back to the cognitive decline, back to the automobile accidents. Some of the cognitive declines that we see in late adulthood contribute to those higher numbers of accidents. So we already know we have changes in vision and seeing, and vision and hearing, and there's declines in selective attention, divided attention, and sustained attention. It appears that a lot of accidents that we see with the elderly have to do with the inability to function well when it's required to have divided attention. As your reflexes slow, you're going to be thinking more about the brake pedal, the steering, the signal. If there's somebody in the crosswalk, there's a lot of divided attention that has to go on when driving. And as we get into late adulthood, it is a lot more difficult for us to function in those conditions of divided attention. Our memory may decline a little bit in older adulthood. However, it is not a given that people are going to have memory loss in old age. It may be a little bit more difficult to recall certain things. You may be cognitively a little bit slower to get to the point, but memory decline and things like dementia are not normal parts of aging. There is a slight decline, but not a significant decline. Episodic and autobiographical memory decline. Remember, that's the episodes of your life telling your story, your autobiographical memory. These types of memory, the reason that we say that these decline is because the way we remember incidents over time is very malleable. It changes. Each time we pull that memory out and think about it, it's subject to change. And we have a tendency to remember things that in a way that will represent us in a positive light. Our source memory declines. In other words, where we got that info from, we won't be able to remember that. And there's something called a reminiscence bump, which is where you may have a increase in certain types of memory when you're reminiscing. Okay, so dementia. Dementia is a global term for any neurological disorder in which the primary symptoms involve a deterioration of mental functioning, the loss of ability to care for themselves and recognize familiar surroundings and people. So 20% of adults over 80 succumb to dementia. So dementia, though, is that difficulty with cognitive functioning. That does not necessarily mean that the person can't feed themselves. It just means that they start losing recognition of familiar things and people. They can also forget how to do certain things, but usually it doesn't have to do with a big physiological decline. We're talking about more of a cognitive decline when we're using the global term of dementia. Alzheimer's disease, on the other hand, is a specific condition. It is a specific type of disease. It is a progressive, irreversible brain disorder. It is characterized by a gradual deterioration of memory, reasoning, language, and eventually physical functioning. So somebody with Alzheimer's in the later stages will not be able to get around on their own. They actually start losing physical functioning as well. In 2005, 4.5 million US adults were affected by Alzheimer's disease. Factors influencing Alzheimer's risk. There's something called the APOE gene, and it indicates risk, but not everyone with the gene develops Alzheimer's disease. Actually, this gene is only present in a small percentage of people with Alzheimer's. A diet high in fat and sugars has a tendency to increase the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. African Americans have the highest rates of Alzheimer's disease. All right, Alzheimer's disease, some of the markers for this disease is a decrease in acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that is very important for memory. Your as your brain shrinks and deteriorates a little bit with age, but with somebody with Alzheimer's, they start having a significant amount of shrinkage and deterioration. This deterioration is marked by something called amyloid plaques. Amyloid plaques are deposits of protein accumulating in blood vessels. So on this image, you can see here an amyloid plaque. It's kind of disrupting the flow of blood in this particular area of the brain. And something called neurofibrillary tangles. These are twisted fibers that build up in neurons. So on this side, we see a normal neuron. Everything's nice and smooth, and the vessels are all smooth. And then here we see neurofibrillary tangles. So inside this actual neuron, you have these tangled pieces of protein. And these tangled proteins can stop and damage some of the functioning of that cell. There's been recent study, and I cannot remember the author, but there was a recent study that I just read that talked about the lack of deep sleep contributing to the development of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. So here's an older brain that is a healthy brain, and here's an older brain that has advanced Alzheimer's disease. You can see how the brain has shrunk. The ventricles, the spaces in here are a lot wider, and a lot of the white matter here, the tissue is reduced. Treatment and care for those with Alzheimer's, there's no cure. Medications work to limit loss of acetylcholine, so there are some meds that can help people function longer. New treatments explore role of lymphatic system. There's a lot of different treatments that they're looking at these days. Hopefully, we'll eventually come up with something that can help cure this. And it is difficult for caregivers to cope with. Usually the spouse or the children of the loved one have to try to take care of these folks with Alzheimer's. And it can be challenging. It can be really challenging. Some protective factors that can help reduce the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease are something called the Mediterranean diet. And the Mediterranean diet can help you to, it lowers, you're taking in a less amount of fat and sugar, increasing your cognitive activity, in other words, keeping that brain active. Keeping that brain active creates something called cognitive reserve. As I mentioned earlier, when you are cognitively active, you can still be laying down new dendrites. So you can be having some dendritic branching, more synapses being formed. Now, that helps to be a little bit protective. It creates a cognitive reserve. Physical exercise is also something that can reduce your risk factors. Another disease that we see, a brain disease that we see often as people age, is something called Parkinson's disease. It is a chronic progressive disease characterized by muscle tremors, slowing of movement, and partial facial paralysis. Muhammad Ali and famously Michael J. Fox suffer from Parkinson's disease. This particular disease is triggered by a degeneration of neurons that produce dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical necessary for normal motor control. It's a very fascinating neurotransmitter. It does a whole lot of stuff. It's important in your reward pathways for, and a lot of other things. Within your musculoskeletal system, one of the functions of dopamine is to keep the body from moving involuntarily. It is basically suppressing the body's desire to move. For example, your muscle switches basically have to be on. So your muscles have to be ready to move at any given moment, but your dopamine has to kind of regulate this movement. It keeps excessive movement from occurring until it's time. So it will suppress that movement until it's needed. If you do not have enough dopamine, then what can happen is you start to have the tremors and things like that that you see in Parkinson's disease. And things like L-Dopa and, dopamine kind of replacement is what is used for this treatment of this disorder, which also there is no cure for. All right. As older people lose some of these abilities, as we have deficits in our vision, in our hearing, in our mobility, we have to do something called selective optimization with compensation. What this is selecting valued activities and doing those and letting go of some of the other activities. That way you can optimize performance in those activities. And you compensate for the decline by using new strategies. I'll use myself for example. As I get older, okay, I had to give up skiing already. I love to snow ski. I love to ride my horses. My knees are not going to be able to do both. I'm giving up snow skiing so I can keep riding my horses. That's selecting a valued activity. I'm going to optimize my performance in those activities. I'm going to spend more time doing that. I'm going to exercise in a way that helps strengthen me so I can do that activity. And I'm going to compensate for declines by using new strategies. When I can't get my foot up into that stirrup and swing up over that horse, I'm going to use a mounting block. So that will help me, and it's the steps that you get up on the horse. So that would be selective optimization with compensation. Social and emotional development in late adulthood. According to Erikson's psychosocial theory, this is the period of integrity versus despair. Integrity is that feeling whole, complete, and satisfied with life choices, acceptance of setbacks and disappointments, and a sense of meaning. So basically, that's looking back on the things that may be failures in your life or that you maybe wish you did a little bit different, and accepting those things and saying, okay, those were a little bit disappointing, those were setbacks, but you know what? My life is good, I've done a good job, and I feel satisfied with where I am and what I have done. So that's the integrity side. On the other side, we have despair. Sorry. Despair is where you are, let's see if I have the slide for that. Hold on. Nope. So if you're despairing, you're going to feel the opposite of these things. You're going to look back on your life and say, oh, I didn't spend enough time with my kids. I'm so upset. Why didn't I go to vet school? I wanted to be a vet. And I'm going to dwell on these things. I'm going to dwell on the things that I did not do. Instead of just viewing my setbacks and disappointments and saying, okay, I accept these and I move forward, I'm going to dwell on those. And those are going to make me a very unhappy and despairing person. So that's the despair side. Interestingly, in later adulthood, people have a tendency to change the way they make their goals and the way they seek friendships and relationships. There's something called socio-emotional selectivity theory. And this has to do with being a lot more selective about your social contacts. As people get into late adulthood, they have a tendency to have fewer friends, but those friends that they have, they're more selective about. They are much more picky about the people they're willing to spend their limited time with. Their goals also change in later adulthood. People have a tendency to change from knowledge-based goals, learning a lot more stuff, to emotion-based goals, like what is going to make me happy and satisfied through the remainder of my life. So that's the way goals change in later adulthood. Older adults seek relationships low in conflict and high in mutual enjoyment. And that is part of that socio-emotional selectivity theory. This is just a little graph that talks about the importance of motives. The pursuit of emotional satisfaction is what we do when we are very young. When we are little kids, when we are little infants, we are looking for emotional satisfaction. And then that dips down, and then towards the end of our life, we're pursuing that emotional satisfaction again. From infancy, you get past the infancy stage here, you start worrying about gaining more knowledge. So the pursuits are more knowledge-based all the way up until middle age. And at middle age, you start swapping over to that pursuit of emotional happiness or satisfaction. Relationships with adult children are important. Contact with adult children continues into late adulthood. Asian cultures believe in filial piety, which is respect for your elders, and part of becoming an adult in the Asian culture is to be able to care for your parents. So being able to care for your parents throughout their life has been a staple in a lot of Asian cultures. In Western cultures, assistance typically flows from parents to children and not necessarily from children taking care of parents. And there are gender differences. Oftentimes the daughter ends up taking care of the parents instead of the son. Relations with grandchildren and great-grandchildren become very important in late adulthood. They are usually positive types of relationships because a grandparent's not going to want to maintain one that is not positive when they're in late adulthood. Closeness and affection remain strong. There are gender differences. Grandmothers tend to be more active with grandchildren than grandfathers. That's not always the case, but that is a lot of times the case. And great-grandchildren signal family endurance. In other words, the family will go on. Living arrangements in Western countries, living independently in Northern Europe and Southern Europe, they tend to live with a child. So places like Italy, older adults often live with their children once they can no longer live independently. In Northern Europe, adults tend to live independently and then oftentimes go to assisted living and nursing facilities, such as they do in the United States. Living arrangements in Asian countries, once again, they live independently until time to live with an adult child. The adult child would take them in and feel that it is a normal thing to do. Institutional arrangements are growing more common in Asian cultures as some of these cultures become a little bit more westernized. Some older people are tending to go into institutions more. Marital satisfaction basically is at its highest points in later adulthood. Divorce would have occurred earlier, leaving the strongest marriages most of the time. There's fewer daily responsibilities that cause stress on the marriage and more time to enjoy leisure activities as long as their health allows for this. They tend to solve disagreements calmly, and they tend to have high marital satisfaction in late adulthood. Sexuality in late adulthood. Sexual behavior expectations differ by culture, and we talked about that before as well. Activity relies on partner availability and physical health. You have to be physically healthy enough to go ahead and have sex. And with assistance, some problems are correctable, even in late adulthood, for people to continue to have a good sexual relationship of some sort. Desire persists, and the majority of people over the age 65 still have sexual ideals and want to have some sort of sex. The decision to retire is impacted by finances, physical health, and job satisfaction. Satisfaction is high for those with money and health. So if you have good health and you have some money, of course, you're going to feel great about retiring. About 1/4 of people who retire have trouble adjusting. Ageism, I mentioned earlier, is a prejudice against others because of their age. There's negative stereotypes, incapable of thinking clearly, learning, contributing to work. That's a negative stereotype. And there's discrimination. Discrimination is the action that's taken against that older person. So being not hired, forced into retirement, or socially shunned. The last slide that we're going to take a peek at here is religiosity. I think we looked at this earlier in I think we did it in our adolescence chapter, maybe emerging or young adults as well. So if we take a look at our ages, we have 20, 40, 60, and 80. So our green is 20. And when we look at religiosity, attends church weekly. We'll see a pattern here. Fewer at age 20, the most at age 80. Strong believer. So at age 20, you're on the lower side, and then age 80, a lot stronger, okay? Prays daily. Now we're getting up here, even with our younger group, we're getting up to over 40%. And then we're getting up to 70% that praise daily in our 80-year-old group. And then we have our no religion group. So when we look at our no religion group, the highest group would be our 20 somethings, and they are, a little over 20%. And then when we look at our older population, we're looking only at about like 6 or 7% that have no religion. All right, so that should pretty much wrap it up for this particular PowerPoint. I hope you guys have a really good day, and I will see you next time.